Seraphina Voss arrived in Northmere on a Tuesday morning, when the sky was the color of old pewter and the trees along the mountain road had just begun to lose their leaves. She stepped out of the black car with a leather satchel over one shoulder and a calm expression that gave nothing away. Two assistants followed behind her, carrying files. The pack steward, a thin man named Aldous, met her at the gate with wide eyes and a stiff handshake. "Arbitrator Voss," he said carefully, "welcome back to Northmere." "Thank you," she said. "I'll need a workspace by this afternoon, and full access to the land registry documents by morning. Can you arrange that?" Aldous nodded quickly. "Of course." She walked through the gates without looking at the great hall, where, 9 years ago, she had collapsed on a stone floor while the man she loved announced he was choosing someone else. She had chosen not to think about that on the drive up. She had chosen, instead, to review the case notes. The border dispute between Northmere and the two neighboring packs, Greyvale and the Thornridge Collective, had been building for almost 3 years. The argument was over a stretch of forested land that sat between all three territories and held significant water rights. 2 attempts at direct negotiation had failed. One had ended with a broken table and a Greyvale elder walking out. The pack council had finally stepped in and ordered formal arbitration. Seraphina had handled more complicated cases. She set up her workspace in a small room off the main corridor, spread the maps across the table, and got to work. She did not see Kael that first day, though she felt the moment he entered the building. That particular awareness had never fully left her, even after everything she had done to quiet it. It was like hearing a song you had not thought about in years and discovering you still knew every word. She ignored it and kept her eyes on the land maps. He found her on the second morning, standing in the corridor outside the records room with a cup of tea she had not touched. "Seraphina." She turned. He looked older, which made sense because he was. His shoulders carried more tension than she remembered, and there were lines around his eyes that had not been there before. He was still striking in the way that powerful people sometimes were, but something about him seemed heavier, as though he had been carrying a great deal for a long time. "Alpha King," she said. "Good morning." He paused at that, clearly thrown by the title. "I wanted to say, I have witness interviews starting in 20 minutes, she said pleasantly. "If you have concerns about the arbitration process, my assistants can schedule something formal. Otherwise, I'd appreciate keeping things professional while I'm here." She picked up her satchel. "Have a good morning." She walked away before he could find the words. Later, alone in her room, she sat on the edge of the bed and breathed slowly until her hands stopped trembling. Not from grief, not anymore. Just from the simple, physical effort of being in the same building as a wound she had spent years closing. She was fine. She reminded herself of that firmly. She had been fine for a long time. The arbitration sessions were held in the long hall each morning. Seraphina ran them the way she ran all her cases, firmly, fairly, and with a patience that occasionally surprised people who expected a woman in her position to perform authority rather than simply exercise it. She listened to the Greyvale elder describe 3 generations of water usage. She asked quiet, precise questions that made the elder realize, halfway through an answer, that he was contradicting something he had said the day before. She did not point this out dramatically. She simply wrote it down and moved on. The Thornridge representative was younger and angrier, convinced that Northmere had deliberately manipulated old boundary markers. Seraphina spent an entire afternoon walking the land with him and a surveyor, letting him show her every contested stone and fence post. She asked him to explain his grandfather's account of where the original border had been. He talked for an hour. By the end of it, he seemed lighter, simply from having been genuinely listened to. The pack members who observed the sessions began to talk about her in low voices. Some of them remembered the girl who had been humiliated in this very hall. They were trying to reconcile that memory with the composed woman now running proceedings at the head of their table. Kael watched her work from a chair along the wall, where pack leaders were permitted to observe. He said very little. He watched everything. It was in the 3rd week that Mira made her mistake. Seraphina had noticed small things before then. A witness who seemed nervous in a way that had nothing to do with being questioned. A Greyvale elder who arrived one morning, looking like he had not slept, and changed 2 minor details in his testimony. She noted everything without reacting. Then one of her assistants, a sharp young woman named Petra, brought her a document late on a Wednesday evening. Someone approached the Greyvale water steward yesterday, Petra said, offered him a cash settlement outside the arbitration process if he'd change his account of the 1987 boundary agreement. Seraphina looked at the document for a long moment. Who approached him? Petra told her. Seraphina set down her pen. She looked at the wall for a moment, then back at the document. File it with the Pack Council office in the morning, she said. Standard violation report. Don't speak to anyone here about it tonight. Yes, arbitrator. After Petra left, Seraphina sat quietly in the empty workroom for a few minutes. She could have done a great deal with that information personally, she knew that. She also knew that the moment she used her legal authority for anything other than its intended purpose, she would become something she had worked very hard not to be. She turned off the lamp and went to bed. The violation report landed with the Pack Council the next morning and caused the kind of quiet disruption that spreads through stone buildings. Felt everywhere, seen nowhere. By afternoon, everyone in Northmere knew something had happened, though most did not know what. By evening, the shape of it had become clear. Kael requested a brief meeting with Seraphina that afternoon. She granted it. He sat across from her in the small workroom, his hands folded on the table, and she could see that he was struggling with something that had nothing to do with the arbitration. I want to apologize, he said. For what, Mira? That matter is with the council, Seraphina said. It's not something we need to address between us. Seraphina, his voice was different this time, quieter. I need to say something that isn't about the case. She looked at him steadily. Kael. He stopped. I know what you want to say, she told him. And I'm not saying that to be unkind. I'm saying it because this is not the right moment, and I think somewhere you know that too. Let me finish what I came here to do. Then we can talk, if you still want to. He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. All right. Thank you, she said. That's all. He stood, and she thought he might say something else, but he only looked at her for a moment, in the way people do when they are searching for something they half expect not to find. Then he left. The arbitration concluded on a Friday. The agreement Seraphina presented was not what any of the three packs had come in expecting, which was usually the sign of a good settlement. Greyvale retained primary water access rights through the dry months, which was what they cared about most. Thornridge received formal acknowledgement of their historical land claim in the northern section, along with a jointly managed conservation boundary that gave them a voice in future development. Northmere gave up a small strip of disputed forest that it had never truly needed, and received, in return, a 10-year non-aggression agreement and 2 new trading routes. All 3 representatives signed by mid-morning. The pack elder who had overseen Northmere's interests for 40 years shook her hand afterward and told her it was the cleanest resolution he had seen in his career. She thanked him genuinely. She liked him. She spent the afternoon packing her files and saying brief, warm goodbyes to the staff who had helped her during the weeks. She exchanged contact information with Petra's counterpart in the Northmere Records office, a cheerful older man who had tracked down 17 historical documents for her without complaint. She planned to leave the following morning. That evening, a pack elder named Soren asked to speak with her privately. He was old enough to remember things that younger pack members only knew from stories, and he sat across from her with the particular gravity of someone who has been carrying something for a long time and has finally decided to set it down. He placed a document on the table. Seraphina looked at it. She recognized the legal language immediately. She had read variations of it in the Old Moon Doctrine texts during her years of study. The dissolution rite, she said, was never completed, Soren said. You know this. I do. Someone submitted a formal inquiry to the Pack Council several months ago, he said, from outside Northmere. The council ruled this week. Given the circumstances surrounding the original ceremony and Mira Ashford's conduct during this arbitration, the ruling is that the moon binding was never lawfully superseded. He paused. Mira's legal counsel has already been contacted. Her family has chosen not to contest it. Seraphina was quiet. I wanted you to hear it from a person, Soren said, not a document. Thank you, she said. That was kind. After he left, she sat for a while by the window, and watched the lights of Northmere come on, one by one, in the early dark. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel sad. She felt something simpler and harder to name. The particular stillness that comes when a very old story finally reaches its last page. Kael came to find her the next morning, half an hour before her car was scheduled. He knocked on the open door of the workroom, which she had always appreciated about him. He had always knocked, even when he did not have to. "I heard about the council ruling," she said, without turning from the window. "I wanted to speak with you before you heard it from someone else," he said, "but Soren beat me to it." "He did." She turned around. "What did you want to say?" He took a breath. "I was a coward. I told myself it was strategy, that I was making a sacrifice for the pack. But the truth is, I was afraid of what it meant to be chosen by something I hadn't controlled or earned. A fated bond felt like a debt I owed instead of a gift." He paused. "That was my failure, not the pack's, not yours." She listened without interrupting. "I watched you these past weeks," he continued. "The way you work, the way you treat people, the way you handled what Mira did, submitting it through proper channels without making it personal. I kept thinking that the woman doing all of that was someone I had decided wasn't enough for a kingdom." He shook his head. "I don't know how to explain how wrong I was without sounding like I'm asking you to forgive a debt. I'm not. I just needed you to know that I see it, all of it." The room was quiet. "I forgave you a long time ago," Seraphina said, "not because you deserved it then, because I needed to move forward, and I couldn't do that while I was still angry." She folded her arms, not defensively, just thinking. "I have a life, Kael. A real one. I have work that matters to me, a mentor who changed everything for me, colleagues I respect, and a name I built entirely on my own. I'm not going to set that aside because a legal ruling opened a door. I'm not asking you to set anything aside," he said. "I know." She looked at him for a moment. "That's what's different about this conversation." Outside, a car door opened and closed. "I have to go," she said. She picked up her satchel and walked toward the door. She stopped when she reached him, and for a moment they were standing close enough that the old awareness was very loud. She looked up at him. "If you want to know who I am now," she said, "you can write to me. Through the arbitration office. Like anyone else who wants my time." Something shifted in his expression. "That's all you're offering?" "That's everything I'm offering," she said, and then, quietly, "It's more than you had yesterday." She walked down the corridor and through the front gate and got into the waiting car without looking back. The driver pulled out onto the mountain road, and the trees moved past the window in long rows, gold and copper and nearly bare. She opened her satchel and took out a new case file. She had a mediation in Greyvale the following week. She began reading. 3 days later, a letter arrived at the arbitration office in Varen's Crossing. It was written on plain paper, in handwriting that was neater than she expected, formal without being stiff, careful without being cold. It introduced itself as nothing more than what it was, a man attempting to be honest without overreaching. He wrote about small things. What the pack had decided to plant in the newly agreed conservation area. A book he had been reading that she had once mentioned years ago, which he had finally gotten around to. A question about how she had learned to walk into a room full of people who had once watched her fall apart and simply begin working. He did not ask for anything. Seraphina read the letter twice. She made tea. She sat by her window and thought about the girl who had once stood in a great hall waiting to be chosen, and about the woman she had become in all the years since, and about the quiet truth that those two people were not as separate as she sometimes liked to think. She got out a piece of paper. She wrote back,